te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo rangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere aki nei. Teachers are given some homework. Get a jab or lose your job. They aren't the only ones on deadline. Mandatory vaccination is coming for huge chunks of the health sector. GPs, pharmacists, midwives and more. Sorry, Auckland parents, school won't be back next week. Too risky. The COVID response and Education Minister is live. The super city remains at alert level 3 for at least another week. Waikato and Northland can expect an alert level drop at 11:59pm on Thursday, as long as there's no nasty surprises. But an AWOL close contact of the Northland case is still hiding from authorities. Meanwhile, 3 Mount Eden jail inmates are positive for COVID. One is now in hospital.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. I'm Marama Tipole. COVID-19 restrictions in Auckland will remain unchanged for another week. Cabinet ministers have also agreed parts of the Waikato will stay at alert level 3 for further 3 days. If it's safe to do so, the region will move back to alert level 2 at 11:59pm on Thursday. Restrictions in Northland are set to ease then too. The Prime Minister says this can't happen sooner because the single positive case in the region is uncooperative, so officials are relying on testing to see if the virus has spread to others. Ms Ardern says this period is one of the most challenging and trickiest of the pandemic in New Zealand so far.
I understand why people will ask and want more certainty than we can provide right now, and that's because we are in new territory. But our goal remains the same, even if the approach to achieving it changes.
Cabinet has also today agreed schools in Auckland will not reopen on Monday, October the 18th, and it's not yet clear when they will. Ministers will consider further health advice before making further decisions next Monday. The COVID-19 vaccine will soon be mandatory for large parts of the health and education workforce. The government has today moved to mandate vaccination for high-risk workers in the health and disability sector and school and learning staff and support people. Our political reporter Annika Smith has more.
From December the 1st, GPs, pharmacists, community health nurses, midwives and paramedics, as well as those working in retirement homes and for kaupapa Māori health providers, will have to be fully vaccinated. School and early learning staff and support people must be fully vaccinated by January the 1st next year. All schools will be required to keep a register of staff who are vaccinated and ensure only vaccinated staff and support people have contact with children and students. Secondary schools and kura will also be required to keep a COVID-19 vaccination register for students.
The Education Minister Chris Hipkins says it's not practical to introduce the vaccination requirement sooner.
Recognising that the first dose requirement comes in the middle of a school term, and it would be very impractical to be making hard decisions at that point. But the 1st of January requirement, one of the reasons we chose the 1st of January was because it does give schools then the month of January to sort their staffing arrangements.
Chris Hipkins says vaccinations are the best protection against the COVID-19 virus. The Prime Minister is pleading for the woman who was with Northland's positive COVID case to come forward. The woman has been identified but so far hasn't been located. Jacinda Ardern says health authorities and police are working together to find her, but she appealed to her directly in today's post-cabinet media briefing.
The absolutely easiest option for you right now is to come forward, allow a test to be undertaken so that we can ensure we are protecting those who have been around you, and that may include your family and friends. That is by far the simplest path forward from here.
A GP lobby group is calling for anti-vax doctors to be reported to the Medical Council. General Practice New Zealand has written to chief executives of primary health organisations across the country, telling them to notify the council of any clinicians who undermine vaccination efforts. Last week, RNZ reported there were 2 anti-vax GP clinics in Northland alone, which went into lockdown due to a positive COVID-19 person travelling around the region. The Medical Council has received at least 23 complaints about doctors spreading vaccine misinformation. A band of heavy rain that's soaking the west coast of the South Island is expected to briefly hit the east from this evening. Met Service has issued several warnings, including an orange alert for heavy rain in the Westland Ranges south of Otira, with up to 100 millimetres expected by 9 p.m. Meteorologist Lewis Ferris says a cold change will take hold after the front moves through. It's 4 minutes past 5. Cutting the ball supply to Silver Ferns shooter Grace Weki is a must for the Aotearoa men if they're to level their 3-match series in Wellington tonight. Weki's appearance in the second quarter was crucial to the Silver Ferns' 58-47 win in Game 1 last night. The young Miss Six shooter is likely to get more time tonight, and men's coach David Balamo says they need to keep her in check.
Well, we have to have a wee look at that and sort of come up with a plan to stop Grace. She takes the ball very, very well. So we're going to have to probably do a little bit more work in the mid-court so that we can get that ball turned over before it gets to the circle edge.
Newly appointed Phoenix women's football coach Gemma Lewis says the establishment of an all-female coaching staff is an important development for the game. Lewis and her assistant Natalie Lawrence will be just the second all-female staff in the Women's A-League when it kicks off in December.
It kind of shows that there is a pathway, there are opportunities, like it can become a career, you can take it down that professional route, but that only comes with like exposure and visibility and people being able to see that and for them to know that it's actually an option.
And cyclist Aaron Gate has recovered from a broken collarbone he suffered at the Tokyo Olympics and will lead New Zealand's team at this month's Track Cycling World Champs in France. He'll be joined by Corbin Strong, Ali Wollaston and Michaela Drummond in the rescheduled event. That's the news.
COVID fears up north.
For a whole week, the first one's been saying no, no and no. And the second one, from what I know, is tougher than the first one. So when they finally do get it, it's going to be a get stuff, get if.
Down south.
I can't believe we haven't actually protested in the South Island saying, no, you're not coming here, shut the borders.
And boxing in the flabby middle.
Is his name really Tyson Fury?
Sure is. What a good name. What a fantastic name.
Can't be true.
It is true.
He's got a brother too, right?
Tommy Fury.
Yeah.
Fighting Fit, morning report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Tuesday, Northland to Manawatu, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country. A period of rain tonight or tomorrow morning, followed by fine spells and a few showers. For Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, mainly fine, however scattered rain tomorrow morning. Horowhenua to Wellington and Wairarapa, also Nelson and Marlborough. Rain developing this evening, then clearing overnight. Scattered showers from tomorrow afternoon, some heavy. Severe northwest gales in exposed places tonight and overnight. For Bulla and Western, rain with heavy falls turning to showers tomorrow morning and possible thunderstorms in Bulla, then clearing from Westland. For Canterbury, North Otago and Central Otago, rain spreading north this evening with heavy falls and snow lowering to 400 metres in southern Canterbury and Otago, clearing for most places tomorrow. For Dunedin, Clutha, Southland and Fiordland, rain turning to showers this evening and snow to 400 metres tomorrow. And for the Chatham Islands, partly cloudy with rain tomorrow afternoon. It's 7 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Marama. Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai, haere mai, ki checkpoint I tēnei rā. Auckland, stay where you are. Level 3, step 1, you are not going anywhere for at least the next week. As well as that, school is out of the classroom at least. Auckland children will not be heading back to school next week as planned. It's too risky, health authorities say. For Waikato and Northland, who are also in level 3, the alert level will be reviewed again on Wednesday, but the plan is to drop them down to level 2 on Thursday, assuming there are no nasty surprises. As well as that, a big stick for teachers and high-risk healthcare workers. They'll have to be vaccinated to stay in their jobs. For health and disability workers, the deadline for full vaccination is the 1st of December, and for teachers, it is the 1st of January. The COVID-19 Response Minister, who's also the Education Minister, Chris Hipkins, joins me now. Good evening, Minister.
Good evening.
Why are you giving teachers such a long time to get vaccinated?
Well, ultimately, there's an issue of fairness here where you're putting an additional requirement on someone that could have significant implications for their ongoing employment. You do need to give them a reasonable amount of time to comply.
But everybody's had heaps of times to get vaccinated.
It's not just the teachers either. You've also got to consider the schools. If for some reason, someone doesn't get vaccinated and they have to replace them, there's a process that the school will need to be able to work through. Same with the early childhood centres. They'll need to work through a process to make sure that, A, they've got teachers in front of children, but also that they're treating the person who hasn't been vaccinated, with an appropriate process.
We've had long-running struggles getting the numbers of teachers we need. So have you got enough to fill the gap if some of them decide to walk rather than get vaccinated?
Certainly, this teacher supply has been tight. We absolutely acknowledge that, and we'll be working. The Ministry of Education will be working very closely with schools to manage things and to support any schools that have difficulties as a result of this decision.
Okay, so what is going to happen if schools come back? Well, first of all, can you give us a guarantee that school's going to be back in Auckland sometime this year?
Oh, there are no guarantees when you're dealing with COVID-19.
Do you think it's likely, Minister?
Oh, I think there's a good chance, but we've said that we'll review it week by week. So we've basically extended the deadline out for a week. So we have learning from home for the first week of the school term. That'll give us a further time to get higher rates of vaccination, also to look at what the case numbers are showing us. We did just decide this morning, or this afternoon I should say, that now's not the right time to be bringing schools back when we're seeing a climbing case numbers. And some of our school communities in that alert level 3 area, particularly in Northland and in Auckland, although Northland may well be back down in alert level next week. The vaccination rates still, we've still got to really push harder to get those rates up.
Given that you are giving teachers until January of 2022 to get vaccinated, if school does come back before the end of the year, what do you think is going to happen with attendance if parents have no guarantee that their child is going to be taught by someone who's vaccinated?
So one of the layers of reassurance we've built in is that any teachers who are in front of children who are not fully vaccinated, all teachers will need to be tested before they go back to school, and any teachers who are not vaccinated will then need to be tested every week during the term, and that will give those parents and those students that additional layer of protection to know that we're doing everything we can to keep COVID out of the schools.
Minister, are you considering bringing back high school because those children can be vaccinated, 12 years and above, but keeping younger students at home until the end of the year?
But all options are on the table at this point. We do have some ability, even now, at alert level 3, for those senior secondary school students who are needing to complete assessments and so on and need to be on the school site to complete assessments. There are provisions available for them to do that now. We are making arrangements for exams to still be able to proceed at the end of this year, regardless of where we're sitting with things. So, look, a lot of planning is going into that at the moment. I'm acutely aware that those kids who are doing NZEI this year, it's high stakes for them. We want to do everything we can to support them.
As you probably appreciate, some parents are kind of hanging by a thread here, right? They've had a long period of time where they're assuming a whole bunch of responsibilities. So can you just be, as clear as possible? Let's talk about primary school. Do you think it is likely, given the dates you've put for vaccination and the fact that you're holding off sending kids back to school next week, is it likely that primary students will be back at school before the end of the year? Or can parents and should parents prepare themselves to be schooling their kids until Christmas?
Look, I fully understand the plight of those parents who will be listening to this. We want to get their kids back to school as soon as it's safe to do so. I can't put a specific time frame on that. If I was, giving odds, again, I don't think that would be fair. I do think there's a good chance that we'll be able to reopen schools and have kids back in school, but I don't want to put particular, deadlines, dates, time frames or odds on it.
Understand the deadline, dates and the odds. Let me put it another way. Are you reviewing scenarios which would be that students do not return to school by the end of the year? Are you gearing up a scenario that fits that?
Oh, look, that would be the worst case scenario.
Yes, but are you preparing for that, Minister?
Oh, like I said, all scenarios are on the table and we look at the implications of all of them and what the options are. But as I said, that would be the worst case scenario.
But it's still one of the scenarios that is on the table.
Oh, look, one of the things I've learned about COVID over the last year and a half is you can never rule anything in or out.
So are you basically writing this year of school off?
No, not at all. Like I said, I still think that's the worst case scenario, and I'm still optimistic that we'll be able to get to a better place than that.
You're probably not going to like this question either, Minister, but we've got to ask it. Level 3 for Auckland, another week at least. Should we plan to have Christmas at level 3 and to be stuck within the Auckland boundary?
Oh, look, I think it is really well too early to be talking about that sort of thing. I think that,
it's only a couple of months, though, really, isn't it?
Yeah, Auckland's doing incredibly well on vaccination, and what we saw is over the last sort of week or 2 weeks, a real another big surge in vaccination, particularly in some of those areas where we need to see those numbers coming up. So let's just keep that momentum going, because once we get up around that 90+% marker, then every percentage from there just continues to to really add extra layers of protection. The growth. The benefits, for every percentage.
What if we don't get there, though?
Huge.
Minister, what if we don't get there? And what if we don't get there by Christmas?
Oh, look, I'm feeling really optimistic about Auckland. I think latest projections, I saw that Auckland's currently sitting around 87% first doses. I think Auckland's doing really well, but they've just got to keep that momentum going.
But the thing is, you're prepared to bet on the odds for vaccination, but you're not prepared to give us any odds in terms of returning back to the classroom. So kind of like, can you really have it both ways?
Well, I think we've got a bit more control over vaccination rates. That's one thing we can control. What we can't necessarily control are the case numbers. But certainly in terms of vaccination rates, we're seeing really good progress there. We've got a big drive happening, a huge focus over the next week on vaccination. I think Auckland could well hit 90% by the end of the coming weekend if people keep coming forward, keep being vaccinated.
I want to talk about Northland, and we're running out of time, so I'm hoping you'll be able to give me some quick answers here. The missing woman in Northland, this is the person who was with the woman who was tested positive. This woman is still outstanding. You've said you've made contact with her. What does that mean? Has someone spoken to her on the phone or what?
My understanding is there have been the person has been identified, but actually they haven't been able to extract any information or necessarily locate where that person is.
Yes, but made contact means what? Have they spoken to her person to person on the phone?
No, my understanding is that they haven't been able to do that, but I may be wrong there. The latest information may be that they might have spoken to her by now, but last I had heard they'd not been able to speak to her.
Has she explained why she won't come in?
Well, obviously, like I said, they haven't. This person has not been forthcoming with information, so I've got very little information about them.
The woman who tested positive, has she been hidden by anyone during the course of these events?
My understanding is that person's now in quarantine.
Understand that now, Minister, but during the period of time when you were trying to track her down, was someone or some organisation helping keep her hidden?
No one has put that to me. There's evidence that has happened, but certainly that person did seem to be working very hard to avoid being found.
Were these women, did they travel over the border together or did they meet up in Northland?
My understanding at this point is that they travelled over the border together.
Okay, so the woman with confirmed COVID, what was the exact documentation that she used to get over the border? What did it say she was going to be doing in terms of essential work?
My understanding it was under the social services category. Care for vulnerable people was the nature of the application. I haven't seen the application, but that was my understanding of the nature of the application.
Did it state an organisation?
I'm not sure, so I don't have that information.
Contain any references?
No, I don't have that either. My understanding about the application was that it was approved in error and then it was then revoked.
Appreciate your time, Minister. That is the COVID-19 Response Minister, who's also the Education Minister, Chris Hipkins. It is 17 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoints on RNZ National. Kia ora rawatu mo te whakarongo mai, e haere aki nei. Coming up, Northland and DIY contact tracing after you heard there the COVID case that is refusing to cooperate. So, Auckland will remain in the current Alert Level 3 restrictions for at least another week. Our reporter Nick Trubridge joins us now from central Auckland. Nick, how is the news going down?
Yeah, Lisa. Well, first of all, let's paint a bit of a picture for people listening and watching at home. I'm standing on K Road in central Auckland, and it's pretty much a completely deserted K Road. I'm standing outside Studio, the venue to my right. Usually at this venue there would be signs up saying what acts are coming up, who you've got to look forward to. At the moment all it says is be back soon. How soon? Well, who knows? As for what people are saying, as you were asking, well, interestingly, we haven't really run into anybody who said they wanted us to go back to level 4. That is, of course, despite what a lot of scientists and experts have been saying in the media. We did, however, run into quite a few people who said it's certainly the right time to be staying at level 3. That's step 1 of level 3, of course. But then some other people who indicated they have had more than enough of level 3.
I think this whole thing's a load of rubbish, to be honest, you know. Yeah.
Over it?
I don't think we're ever going to get out of lockdown, to be, you know, I don't know. I am over it. I am over it.
Obviously for hospitality it's not been the great decision, but obviously I guess the government is making the right decision for everyone. So we believe it's the right decision, but of course it's affecting a lot of businesses, especially the hospitality one.
Been a bit of a grindstone, but I work at a school, so it's been good to know that our school communities are safe. Really nice to have that tiny little window where we could see friends and family. That was super exciting, and we found creative ways to do that. But yeah, glad that school won't be going back in a hurry next week because we're not quite ready.
I think that lockdown is a good thing, but measures should be like with going into level 2 and controlling the borders. I think that's a good idea.
I think it's the right place to stay with all the extra people, but I'm pleased we're not going back to level 4. Yeah, I think it's the right place. We can't do much else, can we?
Compared to the rest of the world, comparing us to the rest of the world, we can't really complain, can we? Like, we have other countries that are like in level, they don't even have a level because their government can't do much. But then, yeah, at the same time, with the whole rules, with the 10 people thing, I don't think people are really obliging to that at all. Like, because who's going to stay outside when you can, you know, when you're comfortable with your friends, seeing them after 2 months. So I feel like we're going to stay with like these numbers for a while, and we're going to stay here for a very long time.
So, Nick, that's Aucklanders. What's going on in Waikato?
Yeah, of course, this is now a Waikato issue as well as Auckland. Well, 3 cases there yesterday that were confirmed, Lisa. The good news, though, is that barring any potholes or any twists and turns in the road, they will be back down to level 3 on Thursday. That decision will be finalised for people in the Waikato on Wednesday, so fingers crossed.
Thanks, Nick. That's Nick Trowbridge joining us from central Auckland there. It is almost 22 minutes past 5. Kia mau tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Northland will stay in level 3 until at least Thursday. Residents there are becoming increasingly frustrated as they try and figure out the movements of a COVID-positive Auckland woman who visited the Rohi. A whangarei motel has been added to Tai Tokero's locations of interest today, but details of the woman's trip remain scant as she refuses to cooperate with authorities. Ramped-up testing has found no trace of the virus, but health leaders say the north isn't in the clear yet. Nita Blake-Person reports.
The arrival of Delta in Kawakawa has not been welcomed by locals, but it's been made a whole lot worse by the fact the person who brought it is now keeping their movements a mystery.
We stick by the rules. It's just when these out-of-towners come up and think they can come home on these false papers, it just puts us all at risk.
People need to own up. They know who she is, you know, and people need to speak up for their own safety too, for that matter. You know, never mind about who she is or what, apart from this, of what she's done beforehand, just go and do the right thing.
Own up. I know they'll catch a lot of slack from the community, like a lot of slack, and if they are well known or if people do know them. But it's just thinking about the people that are here, our vulnerable people, our kaumātua and kuia.
We're all doing our part up here, and it takes one to spoil it for many of us.
The town was visited by an Auckland woman who has since tested positive for COVID. She also went to Paihia, Kamo and Whangarei. 2 Whangarei service stations, 2 hotels and Pepe's Dairy in Onarahi have been listed as locations of interest. A woman who travelled north with the case has been identified but not located. She's among 21 close contacts who have so far been linked. Far North District Councillor Kelly Stratford says rumours are flourishing in lieu of official information.
It is a little bit like somebody's privacy rights are being put ahead of our rights to feel safe, but I think we need to bring it back to our own personal responsibility, and if we want to participate in society today, we've all got to play our part.
She says that involves getting tested, isolating and, of course, vaccinated. Vaccinations ramped right up over the weekend and there were 738 tests carried out across the rohe yesterday, nearly 3,000 tests over the past 4 days. Angie Hobson is the clinical nurse lead for Ngāti Hine Health Trust and was coordinating the testing centre in Kawakawa today.
We opened at 9 o'clock, so we probably would have about 50 through.
She says some of those are people who may suspect they're linked to the COVID case.
They probably do, but, we just take it that they're coming to protect themselves. It doesn't really matter, as long as they know that they're making the right choice for them and their families. That's all we need to know. Te Hauora o Ngāpuhi Chief Executive Te Rōpūpoa says without the locations of interest being made public, people are relying on their own trusted networks to keep safe.
When there are delays or continued investigations around information, our whānau start to develop their own kumara vine and connect the dots or connect the communications on who knows what.
Testing has so far failed to reveal any sign of the virus in the north, but Te Rōpūpoa says it's far too early to be in the clear.
We will know within the next couple of days the extent of the positive being in Northland, and then you will see the difference in the communities and how they come together to take care of one another.
The COVID case has brought some positives, including a big boost in vaccination numbers. To date, 188,382 doses have been administered across Northland, including 459 first doses yesterday.
On the matter of the Northland case, who's in MIQ now, police have told Checkpoint they are investigating and will be following up with the individual once they have completed their stay in quarantine. Homai o whakaro, we would love your feedback. Nō reira anei na kaupapa mō te hōtaka nei. Okay, so no school next week in Auckland. That's been put off with no date to start up. Auckland stays put at level 3. Waikato and Northland, you've got hope. Level 2, 11:59pm on Thursday, as long as there are no nasty surprises along the way. Pātui mai, text me 2101. What do you think of it? Tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Keen to hear from you if you're a parent eager for your child to get back to school. While students around New Zealand will return to the classroom next week, Auckland pupils will spend their ninth week at home with no date or set roadmap for their return. As you heard earlier, the government has mandated vaccines for all health and education staff. All teachers will need to be fully vaccinated by January 1st so that schools can secure staff for the start of the learning year. Shirley Maihi is the principal of Finlayson Park School in the Auckland suburb of Manurewa. She has over 1,000 students in years 1 to 6, most of whom are too young to be vaccinated. And Shirley joins me now live. Shirley, no school next week. Do you reckon that's the right call?
Well, kia ora, first of all. Yes, I think that is the right call. Things are too up and down at the moment, and I think another week, but I would hope that no more than a week. Our children have been away from school so long, and many of them haven't even engaged in home learning. So there's a big deficit in their learning this year because we had that lockdown in February as well. So it's not good.
Shirley, when you say a bunch of them haven't kind of tuned into online learning, do you know how many kids have simply dropped off the radar?
Yes, we would have had at least 50% of our children not engaging. A lot of our children don't have connectivity. We did issue hard packs, but some of the hard packs are still sitting in letterboxes, and some of our parents and our don't know how to work with the hard packs. So children have been using the ones that we know about. Children have been using them just willy-nilly and not really getting the best out of for educational purposes out of the hard packs. So we just want our kids back at school. It's easier for our teachers to be on a face-to-face basis. Our teachers are stressing out about not getting to the children they need to deal with, really.
So you have more than 1,000 students, right? How many staff have you got, and do you know how many of them are vaccinated?
We've got 102 staff, and probably only 6 at this stage are not vaccinated. So we've been pushing hard all through the lockdown to use this time to get vaccinated. And I would say only one of my staff is not able to be vaccinated because of health reasons. So, most of them are recognising we're professional people. We want to do what's right for our community, not only keeping ourselves safe, but keeping all our community safe as well. We want to reassure our parents that our teachers are safe. So, yeah.
So do you support it being mandated so that you don't have to try and deal with that yourself?
Absolutely do. We absolutely needed the government to mandate because it's so difficult having each school having to find a pathway through what is right and what is wrong. So mandating by the government is exactly what we wanted.
Shirley, what do you think the school environment is going to be like? We don't have a start date for coming back, but we're told it's too risky at the moment and they need to work through some health sort of regulations. In your mind's eye, what is it going to look like?
Well, I think probably it'll be similar to when we started at level 2 last year. We were very reticent about joining with other children in the playground, joining with other teachers, joining for assemblies. None of that was happening. We just had our children into the school, no parents in the grounds, no visitors to the school, and I think that's the way we'll have to go. And just children will come to school, be taught in their classrooms. They will have some time outside, but we'll do it on a staggered situation so that the whole school's not out altogether. But I think because continue to just home learning on and off, it's just tearing our learners for the students apart, really.
Thank you for joining us, Shirley. Just losing you there on the line. That is Shirley Maihia, who's the principal of Finlayson Park School in Auckland. E te iwi e haere nei e a checkpoint. 3 Mount Eden jail inmates have COVID. One is now being treated in hospital. We talked to epidemiologist Professor Michael Baker about today's developments and the Primary Teachers Union on the government's no jab, no job policy for those working face-to-face with children. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback. Let us know what you think of that. Mandatory jabs for teachers and also a lot of frontline health workers too. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is time now for the headlines with Marama.
Thank you, Lisa. The Education Minister says there are no guarantees that schools in Auckland will reopen again this year. The government had earlier said it was aiming for schools in the region to reopen next week at the end of the school holidays, but decided today to postpone that decision because of the state of the COVID outbreak. There were 35 new community cases today, all in Auckland. The Education Minister, Chris Hipkins, told Checkpoint at this stage he can't confirm any potential opening dates. He says there's a good chance they'll reopen again, but the situation around the Delta outbreak is so fluid it's hard to nail anything down. Decisions to reopen will be made on a week-to-week basis. Mr Hipkins also confirmed today that all health workers and people working in the education sectors will need to be vaccinated by the start of next year. Health workers need to have both jabs by December the 1st, while those in the education sectors have until January the 1st to be vaccinated. He told the programme the dates were set for issues of fairness to give the workers extra time to get vaccinated. Aucklanders will remain at alert level 3 for another week with no relaxation in COVID-19 restrictions. Parts of Waikato and Northland will also stay at alert level 3, but just until 11:59pm on Thursday night. And the Prime Minister has made a direct appeal to a woman who was travelling with a COVID-19 positive woman in Northland and is avoiding efforts to track her down to come forward. She says if she comes forward and gets tested, then it will protect her family and friends as well as the wider community. The woman has been identified, but so far hasn't been located. Ms Ardern says the lack of cooperation from both women is why Northland needs to remain at the higher alert level for the time being. And the Met Service has issued a series of weather warnings with snow expected at low levels as a cold front sweeps up the South Island. That's our news headlines. We'll have a news and weather update at 6.
Kia ora rā, e hono mai hoki mai. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint. Ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Ko taku hoa I nei, ko Nona Peltier, who's here to talk business. Let's start with Z Energy, Nona. They're recommending shareholders accept a takeover offer, and it's from an Australian fuel company. This is Ampol. So what's going on?
Yeah, it's a good offer. According to the board of Z Energy, that's recommending that shareholders accept it. It values the company at about $2 billion, and so it's a $3.83 a share offer, as well as an interim dividend of 5 cents a share at least. So that's what the offer is. Also, Ampol is saying that basically Z would continue to operate pretty much as it does now. And the chief executive of Z Energy, Mike Bennett, he says the takeover by the Australian fuel company will benefit the business in a number of ways. This is what he had to say.
Ampol's much larger than Z. It's about twice the size of the whole New Zealand industry, and it clearly has reached beyond the boundaries of Australia. But two strong domestic companies, strong domestic brands, very focused on customers for both the current business, the current core business, and that much-needed transition to a low-carbon future. So I think scale really matters. I think given we're both committed to that low-carbon future, we can learn from one another. We could try things in New Zealand and scale it up in Australia and vice versa. It could even be something as simple as this opens up much more diverse employment opportunities for people who work or start their careers with Z in New Zealand, given Ampol have operations in Australia, Singapore and Houston.
And now look, so the market did like the revised offer. The share price rose 7% to $3.61. That's still a little bit shy of the offer price, but never mind. The takeover is still subject to a number of conditions, including shareholder approval, the Overseas Investment Office and the Commerce Commission.
And Nona, speaking about petrol, what's happening with oil prices?
Yeah, well, they've really been moving up. So people might have already noticed that at the petrol stations. Look, the price of oil has surged more than 25% since August. Like today, it was trading at $83.59 US. That's a big hike. It's a 4% increase, actually, over the last week. So big increases. And look, the prices still seem to be under pressure to rise further. So there's a lot of volatility in the energy sector right now, and so petrol prices are likely to continue on their path.
Okay, well, take us for a spin around the markets then, Nona.
Right, so we ended down, and the NZX Top 50 Index down 0.5%, 67 points to 13,019. The New Zealand dollar is still a touch weaker at 69.3 US cents, 94.7 Australian and 50.8 British pence.
Thanks, Nona. Ka kite, that's Nona Peltier with our business news. Returning to our top story, Auckland's stuck at alert level 3 for at least another week, with the Prime Minister saying the country's at one of the most challenging moments in the pandemic so far. Auckland students won't be going back to the classroom next week as it was planned. It's too risky, health authorities say. For Northland and Waikato, the alert level will drop to level 2 on Thursday night, provided it gets final sign-off on Wednesday. University of Otago epidemiologist Professor Michael Baker joins me now. Professor Baker, let's start with Auckland, right? So stuck in limbo, really, level 3. Do you agree with the holding pattern?
Well, kia ora. Yeah, very much so. I mean, the data speak for themselves. The outbreak is tracking up. The reproduction number is above 1. We have to act on those data and keep a lid on it.
Is staying at the same place sufficient to keep the lid on it?
Probably not. I mean, the changes, the slight loosening of alert level 3 that came into effect last week will take at least another week before they appear in the numbers, because we're always seeing what happened 7 or 10 days ago. So, yes, I think we might need to do more in Auckland rather than less.
So potentially over the next week we could see case numbers rise if we think the extra mixing and freedoms that Auckland is being allowed adds to the spread.
That's right. Now, some of these changes I think were very positive. I mean, the recognition that the virus is doesn't transmit very well outdoors, I think was very positive. I mean, that's recognising the importance of ventilation. So that's a big step forward. So the effect of that, of having some gatherings outside, may not be quite as bad as it could be. But I think it's still a concern because of the extra mixing. But clearly we could not possibly open schools next Monday.
Yeah, well, that was going to be my next question. What do we need in order to open them? If next Monday isn't the right time, what do we need to see in order to get kids back to school?
Well, firstly, in Auckland, not the rest of the country, we have to see that we've got good control of the outbreak. Because, of course, if you open schools and number of cases are going up, it's inevitable that you'll see a steep rise in cases after that. And then we risk that scenario we're seeing in Australia at the moment, which I don't think we can afford in Auckland at present.
Do you think that the vaccine mandate has gone far enough? So anyone involved with contact with students, they'll need to be vaccinated, and a whole raft of other health professionals, including GPs and pharmacists, will need to be vaccinated. Does it go far enough?
Well, I think it's a good step. I mean, one of the problems with hospitals is basically they are huge employers. There's so many different occupational groups coming there. Any staff who go in there need to be vaccinated. And I don't think this mandate does cover every occupational group who actually works inside a hospital. I mean, it doesn't cover the cleaners, I don't believe, and some other groups. I think it's not enough. We basically have to mandate vaccination for all workers who enter the premises of any healthcare institution in New Zealand now. We're seeing at the moment that there are outbreaks occurring in hospitals. We don't know always how they get there. So certainly I think staff have to be definitely vaccinated. We also need to think about rapid antigen testing of all visitors and people being admitted. So, I mean, that's another topic. But really, protecting hospitals and also protecting all of our aged care facilities is absolutely critical. And I know we're hearing from Singapore that's a real weak point in their opening up a process at the moment.
Professor, you didn't like the new classifications. You talked about them last week. You thought it was the most confusing week in terms of communication, where Auckland has these sort of step-up levels and then other regions are stepping down in alert levels. Are you clear about the direction we're heading in and what our plan is, particularly for Auckland, if elimination is no longer possible?
No, I think we do need to look at the alert level system. It's worked very well for 18 months. It needs some fine-tuning. I think we should just scrap the step system. I mean, it had so many problems. It was a bit counterintuitive going up the steps, when actually that means reducing pressure on the virus. Also, they kind of resemble the alert level systems anyway. Steps 2 and 3 were like versions of alert level 2. Why not just fine-tune that system? I think people understand it. It's used for modelling. Scientists support it. Our experience has been very good with that system, so it could be improved. The other thing about the steps that was, I think, quite bizarre is there were only 3 steps, and it assumed there was only one way, and that was down. And in fact, unfortunately, we may have to actually go up the alert level slightly, perhaps creating a 3+, where we look at ways of dampening down transmission, but still trying to keep the Auckland economy moving and some people at least at work.
So are you thinking that potentially Auckland is going to have to go back up before it goes back down in this particular outbreak?
Well, we have to wait and see what the epidemic does there. And really, it's partly in Aucklanders' hands at the moment. Because, of course, if people in Auckland follow those, the principle of the alert level 3, will definitely keep on top of the virus. And that means basically staying at home, unless you have a very good reason to go off to work or for some other purpose. So that's the challenge, really, because we've got a number of things pushing us towards higher transmission. One is the slight loosening at alert level 3. The other is a degree of, understandable degree of lockdown fatigue coming in. So we've got to fight against those trends.
We're out of time. Can I get a quick answer to this? Are we going to get to level 2 by Christmas in Auckland, do you reckon, knowing all that you do?
Yes, I think so.
Thank you very much for joining us. That is the University of Otago epidemiologist, Professor Michael Baker there. As daily COVID cases continue to climb in Auckland, there are rumblings of rebellion in the South Island and a call to break away. The separatists now have some allies in high places, with top epidemiologists backing the idea of a border between the mainland and Te Ika a Māui. Conan Young reports.
Epidemiologists Professor Nick Wilson and Professor Rod Jackson say a South Island border is a no-brainer. It would only be open to double-vaxxed essential workers such as truck drivers, and then only if they'd had a negative PCR test and were again checked at the border using a rapid antigen test. Here's Nick Wilson on Morning Report today.
that is what's happening in some of the interstate borders in Australia, and it's worked. I mean, Tasmania has had no community cases for over 500 days now. So although we may have failed with elimination in Auckland, we shouldn't just throw up our hands and let COVID spread around the country.
That message has resonated with people spoken to on the streets of Christchurch today.
Yeah, you bet, mate. Yeah. Go for it, yeah. Make the border. Close it.
Are you worried about sort of what you're seeing in terms of cases getting out of that Auckland border?
Yeah, I am, yeah. Like, it's spreading more and more, isn't it? Like now Waikato, Northland. Well, we're going to be in Northland now for a holiday, so we had to cancel it, so we're down here now, so it's not good.
Cut the cable. Understand the sentiment. Probably not fair on the North Islanders, but understand the sentiment.
Good idea, but it won't be done. Not under this government.
What makes you say that?
Well, she's a useless Prime Minister.
If it helps stop the spread of COVID from the North to South Island, I can't see it being a bad thing as long as it's managed properly.
However, not everybody thought it would work.
I mean, if we have to, then I'm all for it, but also could cause some serious angst, and I'm not sure how they could do it either and control it with freight and all that sort of stuff.
Canterbury Employers Chamber of Commerce head Leanne Watson says the idea has merit but might get more buy-in if it came with a promise of greater freedoms.
We've had, I guess, probably quite a high degree of frustration in our region as to, why we continue to be at alert level 2, for example. So I think, if the message was close the borders down and put the South Island back to whatever the new alert level 1 looks like, I think there would be very strong support for that.
However, further south in Queenstown, Chamber of Commerce head Ruth Stokes says keeping North Islanders from visiting the South Island would be a disaster for hospitality and tourism businesses.
Taking Auckland out has taken us at the knees. You take out the remainder of the just over 4 million people who live in the North Island by making it harder for them. It's tough.
Melbourne University epidemiologist Professor Tony Blakely says strict borders have worked well in West Australia and Tasmania and could be just as effective in the South Island. But he says they can't be the end goal. He says they must be combined with a huge effort to boost vaccination rates for the day when COVID finally manages to kick in the door.
You need to ask yourself, if you're in the South Island, what your long-term strategy is here. And presumably it's not to live hermetically sealed from the rest of New Zealand, the rest of the world forever. It's to be able to open up and have people coming and going. Even at 80% double vax, with some measures, you can walk your way through to it without too much risk.
Tony Blakely has a word of warning for the South Island, saying people should still urgently get vaccinated so COVID doesn't run rampant if it does arrive.
It is 14 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're a Checkpoint on RNZ National. E Muriaki ina pita kōrero after the news at 6. More on mandatory jabs for teachers as the government imposes a deadline for full vaccination. A prisoner from Mount Eden Jail is in hospital under guard after becoming ill with COVID, and 2 others with the virus are in quarantine at the prison. Corrections says all 3 of the prisoners were infected separately outside of the jail, and there's been no spread within the facility. It says prisons are following strict protocols, with new arrivals essentially isolated in bubbles for the first 14 days before joining the general prison population, with both staff and prisoners supplied PPE. There's been 6 COVID cases in our jails since the pandemic started, and right now about 65% of inmates across the country have had their first Pfizer shot. Corrections Chief Custodial Officer Neil Beals explains what's happening with the 3 infected inmates.
They're all men who were received into custody at Mount Eden Corrections Facility this month. The 2 of the men returned positive results for COVID-19 prior to coming into custody, and the 3rd was a known associate of a positive case. So all 3 men were therefore immediately placed into a dedicated quarantine area where they've been cared for by fully vaccinated staff who all wear 4-point PPE. That includes masks, gloves, gowns and eye protection. And of course then one of them deteriorated, so he is now in hospital where he remains as of today. So look, no correction staff or people in prison are considered close contacts of these 3 due to the way that the 3 men have been managed. We have a very, very detailed and specific way of managing people when they come into prison. So the 2 that remain in prison with us are in quarantine area or at Mount Eden. The other one, as I said, is still in hospital. Corrections officers are with the man in hospital to ensure the safety, of him, the hospital staff, and the public, as we would do with, generally most other prisoners who would go to a hospital. And obviously, I'm restricted on, what I can, what information I can give you in terms of their personal data, but that's the situation as it stands as of today.
Neil, can you tell us, at least, is this person particularly unwell?
Well, he's unwell enough to have required us to move him out of prison, where we can only provide primary care in prison. So just as anybody else would have been in a similar situation, in the community, if you're deemed ill enough to require treatment in hospital, then that's what we would need to do, and that's what we've done in this case.
So to be clear, at the prison, can you provide oxygen?
We could do, but we would probably not do in a prison. If somebody required that, we would send them to hospital. But like I said, what we would be doing in prison is providing primary care. We can manage symptoms, so if it's flu-like symptoms or, not to the case where it's becoming, quite critical, then, we can manage most of those things. But we will always follow the guidance of our health advisors. We have nurses working with us, we have doctors working with us, we receive guidance from public health officials, and our first and always will be our priority is people's safety and their health. So at this point in time, we have 2 who are being managed very well at Mount Eden, 1 in hospital.
So these cases came to you with COVID. There is no suggestion that this has been spread internally at the jail.
No, I can absolutely categorically state that. All the way, even from last year, all the way through the lockdowns and up until this point, we've managed COVID within prisons exceptionally well. I've got to give credit to the staff who are doing this. We have not had community spread within a prison. Nobody has caught COVID from a prisoner. No member of staff has caught COVID from a prisoner. No other prisoner has caught COVID from another prisoner or a member of staff. And that has been down to we've got a very, very rigorous process of people when they come into prison. They are triaged through our receiving office. They are seen by our nurses. We keep them separated from other prisoners for 14 days while we check for symptoms. Like everybody else, that goes through, say an MIQ facility. We will test them on day 1, day 5, and day 12. If they are symptomatic, we move them into a different channel. We can move them into a quarantine space and then work with our health providers to make sure they get the best care. If they go through that 14-day process and they remain asymptomatic and there's no problem, then on day 15 they come out of there and they go back into the mainstream prison, just as somebody coming out of MIQ would return to the normal community.
So Neil, during the pandemic, how many cases have there been in prisons around the country in total?
From all the way from last year?
Yes.
So, last year we only had the 1 case, and that was the lady who was sent to us because she was refusing a test. So she was sent to prison and then released when she agreed to have a test, and only when she was released and had a test was she found to be positive. However, she was managed all the way through because of the situation she was presenting. She was managed all the way through at the time as positive, which kept everybody safe. And so far, we've had these 3 individuals plus 1 prior. So I think, and I can check with these and confirm for you, Lisa, but I believe so far these are now the 4th one that we've had. There's 3 that we've got currently and 1 who's now recovered. And we've had a woman in Auckland Women's as well. So that's, in terms of our numbers, very, very low numbers coming to us. However, the difference that we're seeing between this outbreak and the last outbreak, of course, is last time we had nobody except from the 1 person I said, but we had no male prisoners. This time we're seeing with Delta a different set of circumstances. Obviously, we're seeing what's happening out in the community. That therefore presents a very similar to a risk to us in prison. So we're adjusting our processes accordingly. But the numbers are exceptionally low.
Are you doing any kind of surveillance testing of the inmates?
Well, surveillance testing at the moment is a bit of a tricky issue because obviously, surveillance testing is a medical procedure and therefore people have to agree to it. But at this moment in time, we are not running a surveillance testing program of those in the mainstream because, of course, we've got all of the measures up front when people come in. So that's where our protection lies. That's where our best defence is. If people do, report ill while they're in prison, and they're not in the separation units, then obviously all the normal things that would happen as, if you reported ill, you'd see your doctor, you'd see a nurse, and we'll get people tested. But the surveillance testing for prisoners at the moment, is not happening because all of our defences is right up front in the separation and the triage area.
Is that something under consideration though, Neil?
Well, look, we're keeping everything under consideration because this is fast-moving, and we follow the advice from the MOH. So we will respond to this risk as we progress, and we're operating emergency centres, both in all regions. Certainly, Northern region have got their ECC stood up. I'm looking after the national centre here, so we're very responsive, and we listen to what's going on. We take advice, and also we've got to work with our counterparts in the wider justice sector as well, and in the health sector. So we will keep all of these things right in the middle of our radar, and if it is appropriate to introduce things and it's lawful to do so, then we can. At the moment, I've got to say that I think that our system is as robust as it can be. We've been doing this for a long time now, and I think if you speak to our staff out in the field and the people that we're looking after out there, they will attest to the fact that our systems are very rigorous. We do our assurance checks where we find that they're not up to scratch. Then we reinforce those. We go back in. We send out more communications. We make sure our PPE is available to everybody. We liaise almost daily with the MOH. We've got professionals working at this. We've got professional healthcare staff advising us daily. So I feel at this moment in time, we're doing everything that we should be doing. But if there's more to do, then we're always willing to look at that.
And that's Neil Beals. At level 3, prisoners can't have face-to-face visitors. Work to release programs and face-to-face rehab programs are all suspended. Sydney's been celebrating what's being dubbed Freedom Day, but only for those fully vaccinated. After more than 100 days in lockdown, it's a relief for many and a shot in the arm for a suffering economy. World Watch's Max Toll filed this report.
Our lockdown ends in 6 minutes, and I just got to Kmart because they're opening at midnight, and you should see how many people are here. It's crazy.
Crazy is one way to describe it. There's been massive queues in Sydney today, not only outside Kmart, but at cafes, gyms and hairdressers. Masks are no longer required outdoors, and people can now visit friends and family at aged care homes. A relief would perhaps be the best word. Many in Australia believe today marks the beginning of the end of the pandemic, and they've been relishing the moment.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Here we are, it's 12:01 a.m. on the 11th of October, Freedom Day, and we're starting the day off we're doing pretty much a 21-hour hair marathon.
I can finally hang out with my mates after 4 months, finally get a haircut as well.
Yeah, it felt really good.
Amazing, honestly.
Just the vibe was incredible. All of our classes were, packed out.
The new State Premier, Dominic Perrottet, insists people should be excited.
I think if everyone treats each other with respect and kindness during this period, we're going to open up safely.
But deciding to live with COVID is still an experiment, the first of its kind in Australia. Dominic Perrottet says people in New South Wales can no longer afford to live like hermits, and an increase in case numbers and hospitalisations are, unfortunately, inevitable.
I'm confident as Premier of the State, based on the advice that we've seen from the health team, that the easing of restrictions that we're putting in today are measured and ensure that we can keep people safe.
As for sticking to the rules, New South Wales Police are on hand to help businesses, particularly smaller ones, enforce vaccination requirements. In Victoria, officials say the plan to ease restrictions in about 2 weeks remain in place. That's when at least 70% of adults should be fully jabbed. But the daily numbers remain high. There are now more than 19,000 active cases in the state. Yet Health Minister Martin Foley says he's comfortable with the current roadmap.
What we have to do is navigate our way between two very tricky processes. On the one hand, deliver a national plan to reopen at 70 and 80% 100% double dose, whilst at the same time making sure that we protect the capacity of our health system to sustain the increased numbers of cases that will bring.
So, a shift in mindset taking place in Australia, and one New Zealand authorities will be keeping a close eye on in the coming weeks.
A lot of feedback from you all on the COVID announcements today. This listener says, prepare for the worst, hope for the best. Another says the real anger will be if Auckland remains in lockdown because the rest of the country hasn't got vaccinated. On the subject of Northland, I was asking Chris Hipkins about the woman in Northland who's been evading authorities. And this listener says, Hipkins has been dodging these same questions for days now. Northland deserves some more transparency. Philippa's got in touch to say, so glib these commentators from somewhere else, not Auckland. Every single person we speak to out here in the real world would rather make their own decisions according to their vaccination status and their risk tolerance. Enough. We've all had enough, says Philippa. On schools and mandatory jabs for teachers, Petrus says the government missed the bus on the school thing, should have pushed 4 to 6 weeks ago for school staff to be jabbed during the holidays in order to facilitate the soonest possible opening of schools. January the 1st is far too soft, both jabs by the 1st of December as possible, and allows schools to plan next year's staffing. Our country school in Auckland's super city northern area arranged for staff to go down the road for jabs 2 months ago. Sue says, please can senior students get back as they only have 4 weeks at school from October 18th. That is a common theme. This one here says, what about the Auckland senior school students due to start their Cambridge external exams next week? They can't be rescheduled. These students have worked all year towards their exams, plus they've been studying for weeks. The bubbles of 10 criteria are apparently very restrictive and don't allow for the fact that the students are sitting different combinations of subjects. It is a logistical nightmare for the schools to try and operate. Why has nobody considered the impact on this cohort of senior students?
Good evening, I'm Marama Tipole. The Prime Minister is describing this period as one of the most challenging and trickiest of the pandemic in New Zealand so far. Cabinet has decided COVID-19 restrictions in Auckland will remain unchanged for another week. Parts of Waikato and the Northland region are likely to move to Alert Level 2 from Friday. Jacinda Ardern says there's a clear path to transitioning towards living with fewer restrictions because of high vaccination rates over the coming months.
But we are not there yet. And over the next few weeks, while we lift those levels of vaccination for everyone, we need to maintain restrictions to stop the virus from spreading both in Auckland and to other parts of the country.
35 community cases of COVID-19 were reported today, all in Auckland. The Education Minister says there are no guarantees that schools in Auckland will reopen again this year, though that's the worst case scenario. The government announced this afternoon that students won't return to the classroom next week, which would mark the start of Term 4, saying the decision will be reviewed weekly. Chris Hipkins told Checkpoint he remains optimistic, but the situation around the Delta outbreak is so fluid, it's hard to nail anything down.
I do think there's a good chance that we'll be able to reopen schools and have kids back in school, but I don't want to put particular, deadlines, dates, timeframes or odds on it.
There were 35 new community cases today, all in Auckland. The government is making COVID vaccinations mandatory for school and early childhood teachers. Chris Hipkins says teachers must be fully vaccinated before the start of next year.
Schools and early learning staff and the support people who work with them, who have contact with children and students, will need to be fully vaccinated by the 1st of January 2022, and the target for them to receive their first dose is the 15th of November.
The Education Minister says vaccinations are the most effective way of protecting against the COVID-19 virus. A GP lobby group, General Practice New Zealand, has written to primary health organisations this afternoon calling for more anti-vax doctors to be reported. Sam Ollie reports.
The advocacy body's chairperson, Jeff Lowe, has written to the chief executives of PHOs across the country, telling them to notify the Medical Council of any clinicians who undermine vaccination efforts. RNZ reported last week there were 2 anti-vax GPs in Northland alone, which is now in lockdown due to a positive COVID-19 woman travelling around the region. The Medical Council has received at least 23 complaints about doctors spreading vaccine misinformation. A further 34 complaints have been made to the Health and Disability Commissioner about 10 health providers spreading anti-vax information. 7 of these providers are doctors.
The Premier of New South Wales insists the state is prepared to cope with a rise in COVID-19 cases and hospitalisations. Schools, shops, restaurants and offices have been reopening in Sydney after the lifting of a strict lockdown. The ABC's Sarah Jerathi has more.
Across Greater Sydney this morning, people have been adjusting to a new normal, dining in at cafes, hitting up shopping malls and visiting hairdressers for the first time in more than 3 months. The Premier, Dominic Perrottet, says the state will face challenges, but today's a day for celebration.
New South Wales, you've earned it. Enjoy it.
New South Wales recorded 496 new locally acquired cases of COVID-19 and 8 people died. Mr Perrottet acknowledged the health system will be tested as the restrictions lift. He said it was well prepared but wouldn't say if there was new modelling predicting hospital and ICU numbers.
Convicted sex offender Stuart Murray Wilson is dead. Corrections Operations Director for the Lower North region, Coralie Esther, says it appears the 74-year-old died of natural causes in Whanganui Hospital this morning. Next of kin have been notified and registered victims are being advised. A band of heavy rain that's soaking the west coast of the South Island is expected to briefly hit the east from this evening. Met Service has issued several warnings, including an orange alert for heavy rain in the Westland Ranges south of Otira, with up to 100 millimetres expected by 9 p.m. Meteorologist Lewis Ferris says an active front is moving across and up the South Island.
As we get into this evening, that front will make its way through the likes of Dunedin, bringing some briefly heavy rain and those cooler southerly winds. And then it looks like about midnight it will reach up to Christchurch. And then as we head through to the North Island, the northern extent of that rain band goes across the North Island overnight tonight.
Lewis Ferris says a cold change will take hold after the front moves through. It's 6:05. In sports now, the inclusion of young shooter Tiana Metuaro is the only change to the Silver Fern side for Game 2 in the 3-match series against the Aotearoa men in Wellington tonight. Mid-quarter, Sam Winders is still sidelined with a back injury and the Silver Ferns lead the series 1-0 and Game 2 starts at 7:15. The new Phoenix women's football coach, Gemma Lewis, doesn't think they'll be too far behind the other clubs when they debut in the A-League women's competition in December. Lewis, who is a former Football Ferns assistant and age group coach, has been named to lead the side along with assistant Natalie Lawrence. No players have yet been publicly confirmed, but Lewis' squad will be made up of 7 Australian players and 11 New Zealand-based players.
We do want to be competitive, and we do think we will be. We're confident in the fact that the players, as much as they might be young, they might be new to the professional ranks, will be able to compete.
The first player signings are due to be announced next week. Meanwhile, world champions France have won the Nations League final, beating Spain 2-1 in the final. Italy beat Belgium 2-1 in the playoff for the third. And cyclist Aaron Gate has recovered from his fractured clavicle after his crash at the Tokyo Olympics to lead New Zealand's team at this month's track cycling World Championships in France. Gate will be joined by Olympian Corbin Strong, Ali Wollaston and Michaela Drummond in the rescheduled event. That's the news.
This evening, Karen Hay is in the night seat, chatting with photographer Cody Ellingham about his latest exhibition, New Zealand Nocturnes, photos of Kiwi houses after dark. Mona Lynn Courteau shares some musical delights from Venezuela, and it's a real squeeze in James Nokise's shower with guests Henry Hodenberger, Church Leon and Oscar Kitely. Hope the fried chicken supply doesn't run out. On Nights with Karen Hay after the news at 7. On RNZ National.
Yes, I hope not. Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Tuesday. Northland to Manawatu, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country. A period of rain tonight or tomorrow morning, followed by fine spells and a few showers. For Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, mainly fine. However, scattered rain for tomorrow morning. Horowhenua to Wellington and Wairarapa, also Nelson and Marlborough. Rain developing this evening, then clearing overnight. Scattered showers from tomorrow afternoon and some heavy. Severe northwest gales in exposed places tonight and overnight. For Bulla and Westland, rain with heavy falls, turning to showers tomorrow morning with possible thunderstorms in Bulla, then clearing from Western. For Canterbury, North Otago and Central Otago, rain spreading north this evening with heavy falls and snow lowering to 400 metres in southern Canterbury and Otago, clearing for most places tomorrow. For Dunedin, Clutha, Southland and Fiordland, rain turning to showers this evening and snow to 400 metres tomorrow. Chatham Islands, partly cloudy with rain expected tomorrow afternoon. It's 6:08.
Nā mihi marama, no mai hoki mai. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint. Ko Lisa Owen tēnei. No jab, no job for teachers and frontline workers at schools and early learning centres, as well as teachers, GPs, midwives and pharmacists are among those who will need to be fully vaccinated against COVID-19 by the end of the year. The government has announced that high-risk workers in the health and disability sector will need to be fully vaccinated by December 1st and receive their first dose by the end of this month. Political reporter Charlie Drever explains.
School and early learning staff who have contact with children and students will have to be fully vaccinated by January 1st. They'll need to receive their first dose by November 15th. The COVID-19 response minister, Chris Hipkins, says most of these two workforces are already partially or fully vaccinated, but nothing can be left to chance.
It wasn't an easy decision, but we need to have the people who work with vulnerable communities who haven't been vaccinated to now take this extra step. Vaccinations for children aged 11 to 5 are not yet approved, and the health and disability sector includes a range of high-risk occupations.
Auckland schools were penciled in to reopen on the 17th, but this will no longer happen. The Prime Minister says she has received advice from health officials that additional robust health measures need to be put in place before schools can open.
Further public health advice will be provided next week. Distance learning will instead recommence at the beginning of Term 4. Students who are currently able to access education facilities will continue to do so.
Meanwhile, Auckland won't see any further easing of Level 3 restrictions for at least another week.
We know this has been an incredibly hard period for those in Auckland, but these measures, when followed, make all the difference. We want the R value, that's the reproduction of cases, to stay as close to 1 as possible. It has crept up a little in recent days. This means the number of cases will grow. If it moves up further, cases will grow faster. But if followed, our alert level restrictions can help control that spread.
However, the Prime Minister has indicated that the Waikato may be able to move down to alert level 2 at 11:59 p.m. on Thursday, with a final decision to be made on Wednesday. Northland may also have restrictions eased at the same time. But this has been complicated by a COVID-positive person refusing to give their movements, and authorities are still unable to locate their travelling companion.
We've pieced together what we can from CCTV footage and other means of police investigation, but we know this is not necessarily telling us the whole story.
Jacinda Ardern says testing numbers in the region also haven't been high enough, which is needed to ensure there are no unknown cases. She says this is especially important given the region's low vaccination rates.
Meanwhile, here's what parents on the streets of Auckland had to say about compulsory vaccinations for teachers.
It's the best thing. We can't vaccinate them, so we should be vaccinated for them. That's as easy and simple as it is. We're a protective barrier for kids and they can't be vaccinated. I can't see beyond that. They can't have it, and it's something we can do to stop it from getting to them. You shouldn't be working in that sector if you have an issue with it.
I have 3-year-old daughter, but I feel much safer to send my daughter to daycare.
I feel more comfortable knowing that my kid's teacher was vaccinated, and I think it makes sense. I think everyone should still have a choice, but I'm definitely pro-vaccination.
Should go a bit further than what they've said so far, but I suspect it will. And I've always thought, it was coming, it was inevitable, and I think we have to accept it.
And joining me now is the Primary Schools Union NZEI boss, Liam Rutherford. Kia ora, Liam. Do you think this is the right decision?
Tēnā koe, Lisa. Nice to talk to you again. We've known for the longest time that vaccines are going to be the single greatest thing that we can do as the country navigates its way out of COVID. And so I think there's going to be a number of people working in the education sector that are going to be reassured by this call, not just for themselves, but also for their colleagues and tamariki that come through our school gates every day.
If we've known this for a while, why do teachers need until January of next year to get moving and get fully vaccinated?
Well, we know anecdotally that the overwhelming majority of teachers are already in the process. And so I guess having the dates there provide us with those useful backstops. But at the same time, like all professions, we do have a group of people in the education sector that for a range of reasons won't be getting vaccinations.
But when you say you think most of them are through, last time we spoke you said you didn't have any numbers.
Yeah, that's why I said anecdotally we talk to a lot of educators. We know that a big cohort of the teaching profession do tend to be a little bit younger, and so the window of time that they have had is smaller than others. The other part of the equation, though, is around how we're going to go about removing barriers, and that's where we're going to be wanting the government to be partnering with us to make sure that schools have the ability to be able to release teachers during the day to be able to go and get these vaccines.
Release them during the day. Do you think they're going to need time off school at the moment to go and get vaccinated during the work week?
Yeah, so we do hear stories of barriers at the school level around being able to have the time to be able to do it. And so as part of good employment practice, it's going to be really important that we're lowering as many barriers as possible.
And what advice have you been given about, well, when a teacher doesn't get vaccinated and getting rid of them?
Yeah, so today has focused on the very high-level announcements around the mandate. There's still a lot of guidance that's going to need to come as a result of this. But we know that there's a really important role for unions here around how we are supporting those people working in the education sector to get access to fair employment process.
Yeah, so do you imagine that this is going to end up in court at some point?
We're not jumping to conclusions. Like I said, at this stage we are still dealing with the high-level facts, but we know as a principle that our role as a union will be to get alongside our members and make sure that they get access to fair process.
And people who would be considered anti-vax, who do not want to get a jab, if they then lose their jobs, will you go to court with them?
Well, I think there's a couple of steps in the process before we have to entertain that option, particularly around whether or not there would be roles within the education sector where they aren't front-facing with teachers, with students. We know that particularly in this transition time that there's going to be a fair amount of at-home learning, and so there are options that I think we need to consider before we end up at that endpoint.
Well, Liam, that is an interesting scenario, isn't it? Because we've been giving lessons to students in the Auckland region for weeks on end, so it is possible. So is there an argument that unvaccinated teachers can continue to teach but just do it remotely?
I think in the short and medium term, as the country looks to get those vaccine rates as high as they can, there's definitely going to be those transition options. But long term, I don't think there's a single teacher out there that doesn't want to get back face-to-face with their students.
Do you have enough teachers to plug the gaps when some people, identify themselves as not wanting to get vaccinated?
We're going to have to watch this part really closely. I mean, this is an education sector that is already struggling with staffing. And so decisions like this by the government, while they are the right ones in terms of the safety, they are going to have flow-on effects around the lack of staffing that we're already dealing with.
And there's going to be a testing regime as well, Liam. So what do you think of that? So up until full vaccination date in January, if you're partially or unvaccinated during that time, there's going to be regular testing for teachers. Do you know how that's going to work? Is it going to be on site? Will they have to go and get it themselves off site?
No, we're still very light on the details around what's going to be involved with the testing. I mean, that is going to be another area that's going to be heavy in the compliance side for principals to be dealing with. And so that comment around wanting to have as low barriers as possible applies here as well. And we're going to be asking the government to come to the party to ensure that schools are properly staffed.
What's your advice to principals who've got anti-vaccination teachers or frontline staff?
That we just have to work through a fair process here, whether or not people have differing opinions on the validity of vaccines. Everybody, as a worker in this country, deserves fair process, and we're looking forward to getting alongside our members and ensuring they get that.
Liam, the government has said too risky to go back to school next week. Do you agree with that, and if so, why?
I think that's going to come as quite a big relief to a lot of educators in Auckland. Conversations I've been having with principals over the last couple of weeks believe that even the parent community don't think it's safe enough to go back, and they're anticipating relatively low levels of students turning up. But I think particularly as we're coming to terms with this new guidance around vaccine mandates and testing, having an extra week there I think will be greatly appreciated by the sector.
Do you reckon parents will still be put off sending their kids to school this year if they're able to, because the mandatory vaccination date isn't until January of next year, so they won't know if their child's teacher's been vaccinated or not? Do you think that's going to affect the role?
Yeah, I think it is fair to say that we've got a large chunk of our parent community that are going to remain cautious. They're going to be watching those vaccination rates as a country climb over time, and they will make that decision for themselves around when they feel it is safe. And so having that kind of long transition between now and the end of the year, I think is pretty realistic.
Thanks for joining us, Liam. Good to talk to you. That is Liam Rutherford, who's from the NZEI, which is the primary schools union. It is 19 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. There are serious fears New Zealand's health system can't cope with an influx of COVID-19 patients. Health workers say the system was already stretched before COVID and things won't get any easier. But the Prime Minister says overseas examples like Denmark show it doesn't have to be that way. Katie Doyle reports.
The Delta outbreak is continuing to spread, and with it fears our health system may buckle under the pressure. An emergency consultant at Whangarei Hospital, Dr Michael Howard, issued this stark warning on 9 to noon.
One of the main differences we see and we hear is that ICUs will reach capacity, and there's this unfortunate period where we might get to a point where those doors close, where we have no more capacity. You should know that the emergency departments, we're going to keep our doors open.
He says that's where the crisis begins, the ICU overflow backing up an ED.
For where our healthcare capacity gets jeopardized and really begins to suffer.
Kerry Nuku from the New Zealand Nurses Organisation is also worried. To add insult to injury, Ms Nuku says nurses are being ignored by decision makers.
We've got to make sure that nurses and those healthcare workers are part of the solutions and are engaged with the development of any policies and procedures.
Ms Nuku says the system was overwhelmed before COVID-19 and the situation is still critical. She says non-COVID patients are becoming compromised.
And they seem to be getting sicker. So we've got to make sure that we've got clear, strict processes around COVID management while not stopping the ability for patients that have non-COVID issues being able to access services.
But the Prime Minister is adamant our health system won't be overwhelmed. She says Denmark, which has now lifted all of its domestic COVID restrictions, is a good overseas example.
No, it doesn't. No, we do not need to accept that as a fait accompli. Keep in mind, of course, the likes of, say, Denmark, and granted, I looked at their numbers last week, very high vaccination rates. The last time I looked at their ICU numbers, they were in the order of the 20s. So that's an example. Similar population size to us. It's an example of what can be achieved with high vaccination rates.
With Auckland still in level 3 and unlinked cases still appearing, any significant easing of the restrictions looks to be a long way off.
Pacifica GPs on the front lines of the COVID-19 Delta outbreak say they're facing burnout. The frontline workers helping protect Aotearoa from the virus say they're overworked and exhausted and their own mental health is at risk. RNZ Pacific's Alicia Foon has the story.
After working as a GP for Pacific health provider South Seas for a decade, Dr. Marianne Heather has called it quits. She says experiencing burnout while working on the front lines during the pandemic was the final straw.
because I can't keep running at 100 kilometres an hour. I've got to make those life choices and those changes so that I can be okay and then I can still do my job and look after my patients. You can't do it if you're a tired and burnt out doctor. I think it was just time I needed to slow down, and it's all around self-care. You know, sometimes it's just like you're just constantly tired or you can't get up. You just feel like you've lost your motivation to do the things you do. So I think it's really subtle, and it's the scary thing.
New Zealand's GP workforce keeping the country safe are sacrificing a lot to be on the front lines. Like Dr. Heather, many doctors have been feeling the pressure for a while, but now it's really affecting their mental health. Many GPs are working 60 to 70-hour weeks, and every session requires at least an hour or two of paperwork. Dr. Heather says it's taking a toll now more than ever, and doctors are either quitting, taking a break, or opting for early retirement.
I've heard so many stories of colleagues just giving up work and just actually taking time out or quitting just to have a bit of a break or have family time. Colleagues have gone through the burnout and, you know, some of them have just given up doing medicine, you know, or they've just quit to do something like maybe part-time or not even do any medicine for a bit because they're so tired.
Over the last 2 years, Pacifica GPs have been battling the measles epidemic and COVID back-to-back. The Royal New Zealand College of General Practitioners has teamed up with Pacific Mental Health Service LEVA to support the Pacifica workforce. Royal College of GPs President Dr. Sam Merton says Pacific GPs are juggling a lot of different hats.
As doctors in a community, you tend to be a community leader. You don't just deal with the person sitting in front of you in your consulting room. You deal with the community, you deal with the whole whānau. You often end up being the port of call for interpreting services and various other things as well that are outside your remit of just your doctor-patient relationship.
Pacifica Mental Health Service LEVA is providing webinars for over a dozen doctors as well as one-on-one sessions. Their Chief Executive, Denise Kingi Uluave, says they're teaching GPs to look after themselves first.
Sometimes there's this belief that you should have it all together. You know, you should be able to cope with all of this additional pressures that you're facing because you are a health professional. And so we will tend to put on a mask sometimes and just try and cope. And we know that that's not healthy for anybody. It's okay to care for ourselves in order to care for others.
Dr. Heather took part in a group webinar and says slowing down to fill her own tank has been a meaningful lesson.
We take a lot on board and you know, we feel that we just want to make sure that our communities is protected, they're safe, they're getting the right messages, but also too that we are available, you know, to answer the questions and help with the fears and concerns that they have. So we want to do our best.
There are at least 52 Pacific GPs in Aotearoa and 50 more registrars and trainees. Whangarei Dr. Aniva Lawrence says general practitioners are still the poorer cousin and are often an afterthought to maintaining hospitals being open.
There needs to be more political support around the shortages that we're experiencing. The difficulty is that primary care is the backbone. It's still mostly small business ownership across New Zealand. There are over 5,000 of us working day in and day out. If we have an unwell workforce, we'll ultimately have an unwell nation.
An urgent call for more support as hard-working and exhausted GPs get their own health check-in.
A team of promising young women footballers who fled the Taliban in Afghanistan have been told they can live in the UK with their families. The British Interior Ministry is finalising visas for 35 members of the Afghan Women's Development Team who are aged between 13 and 19. They're currently staying in a hotel in Pakistan. The BBC's Caroline Hawley reports.
The effort to find the girls a new home has been described as a race against the clock. They escaped to Pakistan last month, where their temporary visas were due to expire on Monday. The girls, aged 13 to 19, were terrified of being sent back to Afghanistan. Jonathan Kendrick is chairman of the Rocket Foundation, which financed their journey across the Afghan-Pakistan border and their stay in the city of Lahore.
We couldn't just take the girls out. We had to take their entire families because they would have been hunted down
So it's life-changing. These young women had never experienced the Taliban. They were born in a time when they'd got freedom, they could do sports, listen to music, be educated, and suddenly these men come along and start beating them and persecuting them.
He said that after the Taliban takeover, most members of the squad had received death threats. The main Afghan women's team was evacuated to Australia in August, but the development team was left behind and was in hiding in Kabul until they fled to Pakistan, their future uncertain until now. Several football clubs in the UK have offered to support them. The girls are now expected to come to Britain with their relatives and 2 coaches in the next few weeks. They're said to be both excited and very relieved.
And that was the BBC's Caroline Hawley. Now, a lot of you have got in touch about mandating vaccinations for teachers in our interview with the NZEI boss, Liam Rutherford, who said teachers may need time off to go and get vaccinated to meet the deadline. John's got in touch to say teachers getting time off for vaccinations, ! They've had 2 weeks off now to be vaxxed. The Teachers Union requiring schools to give teachers time off to get vaccinated. What a joke, says this listener. It is the school holidays and it takes 20 minutes. And this one, what a joke. Release teachers to give them time to get vaccinated. For goodness sake, go on the weekend. You can't tell me teachers are doing their 37.5 hours each week while in lockdown. This listener says, followed by at least 4 exclamation marks. And someone else has got in touch to say, very poor the government dragging their heels with vaccination target dates for January 22nd for teachers. It's clear none have private business experience, as we are effectively saying they have 3 months to get vaccinated. Shocking, given businesses are hurting now and kids are suffering away from school with ECE closed down too. Another person says, fantastic news, the government is mandating vaccines for staff at schools, the only sensible step. As a teacher, I feel relieved and valued. Kia kaha, this person says. Sue's got in touch to say, I agree with the mandate for education and health. I don't think there was really any other choice. But this one says, I'm no fan of trying to work and deal with children at home, and 8 weeks in it is feeling long. But I am thoroughly relieved that schools are not opening and hope they won't until we have cases under control. If that is next year, so be it. And I am delighted about the health and education vaccine mandates. And this person disagrees, really sad about the prospect of vaccine passports and mandatory vaccination, they say. It is draconian, unethical and discriminatory. Those of us who are vaccinated should feel fairly secure. Children are low risk for contracting COVID. I don't want to live in a society where people are forced to have the vaccine. That's not the way. Better to have love, listening, encouragement and support, says that person. Well, that's it from us. The Late News team will keep you updated throughout the night. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi a pōpō tomorrow from 5 a.m. First up speaks to an Auckland science teacher who's turned the 1 p.m. press conference into an online game.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. I'm Catriona McLeod.